Okay, I'm Laura Babcock. I'm the founder of the museum here and still work as its volunteer director. We welcome all of you. It's marvelous to see such a full house. How many of you have been to the museum before? Excellent. Very good. Thank you. We built it for you, so make sure you come often and see all the new things that we do, as well as joining us for the various events. You're in for a treat tonight. Sunnyville was a very rapidly growing city in the 60s and 70s. The arrival of Lockheed in the 1950s brought a lot of families, a lot of children. Anyway, Sunnyvale High School opened in 1956 with 9th and 10th graders only at first, and sadly closed in 1981. So what's better this evening than having a former student come and speak to you about the high school? Having two former students come and speak to you about the high school. Please join me in welcoming Karen Hansen, director at Brandeis University, who has written the book along with Nicholas Monroe on the unique history, challenges, and accomplishments of this school. And of course, Robert Handa, reporter on the NBC News and classmate of Karen. They both graduated together in 1973. So please welcome Karen and Nick.
Thank you so much, everybody. Hello, Sunnyvale, and hello, Jets. Welcome to the Sunnyvale Heritage Museum, or as we like to call it, the Hangar. And we are here to kind of rally around Karen Hansen. You know, one of the things that we've been talking about before, and I think almost every time Jets get together, we talk about what a special place it was. And we knew it was, but we are so lucky to have someone with such expertise to be able to kind of chronicle it for us and to kind of show the world how special it was. In fact, if somebody had told me, you know, the head of the sociology department at Brandeis wants to do a book about Sunnyvale High, I would have went, what? And so we are so fortunate to be able to have somebody like Karen. This is not unusual for Karen and I to be talking because my name, H-A-N-D-A, and her name, H-A-N-S-E-N. I saw Karen every day of my life at Sunnyvale High. In fact, I used to turn around and talk to her all the time and get in trouble. In fact, I was thinking about doing this interview like this. I can still hear Mr. Paulson, our advisory teacher. Let me see if I can do Eric Paulson. Honda, turn around. But you know what? When I was talking to Karen at that time, I kind of knew that, you know, she had kind of a special perspective on things. You know, she knew and captured details and things like that. And it is so good to see her be able to put this in a book. I've been scouring the book myself, looking for my name. And so I haven't had a chance to read the whole thing yet. But I trust Karen so much in terms of being able to, I don't know, show the honesty and the truth of Sunnyvale High. And I know so many people that attend other high schools, and their high schools are sometimes still open, and they don't have the spirit that the Jets have. And so I think that that's just one characteristic of what Sunnyvale High had as a community. And Karen has been able to take that and not only show it for what it was, but also how it fit into the overall world and the times that we lived in. I'll be honest with you, I sometimes myself didn't even really appreciate how important, how significant the time was that we lived in until I was talking to Karen about her book. So I am really looking forward to reading it. I think we all are. But first of all, I just want to thank Karen for taking the effort because, you know, you don't write a book quickly. You know, she's been doing research and talking to people and just really doing a lot, gathering a lot of information. And also, too, what I think is so important is the insight, you know? It's not like just somebody chronicling history and facts and figures. You know, Karen is able to have that insight into what it was about the community that made it so special. And so I am really looking forward to not only hearing Karen's presentation, but then I will also interview Karen afterwards, and then we will hold it open for a Q&A afterwards, okay? And so I think we're ready to do this. I'm trying to remember if there's anything else. We'll do some acknowledgments and other things later, right? So, okay. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, our friend, our favorite author, please welcome Karen Hansen.
I can't even tell you how wonderful it is to be here and to see all these faces in the crowd. And when I zone into people's smiles and their twinkling eyes, I know you. It has been such a pleasure over the last 11 years to be doing research and interviewing people and writing about Sunnyvale High. And it gives me great pleasure to have you all here. And I should just let you know, the book doesn't officially publish until December 1st. So what we have over here are advanced copies if any of you are interested, but there are many ways to get this down the road. I want to quote one of my favorite authors, and I realized introduced to me by my sister-in-law, Leif Enger. He says, "No miracle happens without a witness." In many ways, Sunnyvale High School was a miracle, and I was a witness. You are all witnesses then, and you are witnesses now. The community was incredibly generous to me in ways that I didn't expect, but were absolutely essential to my growing up. It was not a perfect school. No school is, but something very special happened there. And that is part of what made us feel like we belonged. Sarah Lawrence Lightfoot, I promised Robert I wouldn't lecture, but Sarah Lawrence Lightfoot, who is a prominent sociologist teaching at the Harvard Education School, wrote a book called The Good High School. And what she says is that a good high school develops talents and strengths if it gives people room to move and grow. And if there is a culture of the school, it shouldn't just be about one narrow thing, like college admission. If other cultures shape the school, there's a capaciousness, a chance to do multiple things. Because SHS invited involvement of many kinds, there were many opportunities to belong. So in my assessment, Sunnyvale High School was a good school. And many people I interviewed said that precisely. Another person I want to refer to is Ira Glass, who many of you may listen to on NPR. He runs a wonderful show called This American Life. And he says that individual particular stories can restore the world to its proper size. And I love that because he really gets into the nitty-gritty when he's interviewing people and telling stories. And that's part of how I think about this book. It's a case study of one high school that I loved and I was involved in and I feel committed to, even though it closed more than 40 years ago. But it helps me see the larger world. So I will turn the mic back to Robert, but I just want to say that I feel like another miracle is happening right now because here we are together remembering something good that happened in the world and how people could cross barriers of race and ethnicity and be friends and be sportsmates and be proud of their lives and where they went to school. And I think that for myself is something I've carried through all my life. And now I have some small piece of it in this book. So thank you for coming.
You want to sit down or stand there? Thank you so much, Karen. Yeah, you really do actually drive home the idea that high school is just a universal experience. And we've all gone through it, and every person that went to a high school has sort of similarities to what Sunnyvale went through and things like that. And so for you to be able to take Sunnyvale High as a representation of that, it's a real honor for Sunnyvale High. And for the record, by the way, I did not tell her not to lecture. I just said that if there's going to be a quiz, I want it graded on the curve. That's all right? Anyway, Karen, first of all, you're a hometown girl writing about your hometown, but you live on the East Coast, teach at Brandeis, or you were. When you come back to Sunnyvale, which is sporadic, what is some of the things that strikes you about how much your hometown has changed when you come back? What do you observe? What kind of resonates with you when you see your town now?
Well, I think it's something that strikes everyone who comes to Sunnyvale, which is that it's a series of paved roads and apartment buildings and a few factories here and there. But it's not a place where the very fertile ground feeds orchards. It is a place where people drive through or come to work, maybe live. And that is a transformation that everybody in Santa Clara Valley has witnessed, but it's rather stunning. So it is meaningful to me that there is now a school at the former campus of Sunnyvale High School. They invite us home for a football game every fall and welcome us, and the community still gathers. So that's one of the things that stays the same in the midst of all this development. So I find that very heartening.
Yeah, that's very encouraging to hear, because I think a lot of people do when they come back and they see how much has changed. They worry about the personality and the soul of the city. And quite frankly, I just think that Sunnyvale High School graduates, they embody that spirit, because we keep coming back even though our school closed so long ago. And that's like the city's changed, and yet that spirit endures. I was talking a little bit about how I saw you every day, and the one teacher I did see almost every day and was Eric Paulson, who is here, by the way, and we're very thankful that Eric is here. Thank you, Eric, for being here. But I think that why that's important too is that the teachers and the counselors and the people that worked at Sunnyvale High, they had a real impact on us as students. They didn't just shuffle us from class to class. They didn't just fill out forms for us. We had a real connection to the kind of special teachers there were. Doug Walker is also here, Sharon Prefontaine, Carolyn Buzzdiker, and all the faculty people, they have that bond. That's why they're here, in a way. Tell us a little bit about the special teachers that were at Sunnyvale, and why do you think it is that Sunnyvale High was fortunate enough to have those kind of teachers?
That's a driving question for me and for my book. And what I've come to understand is that the early days of the school had great leadership. There were some really foundational principals. Adrian Stanga and Paul Sakamoto are the people who come to mind in particular, who understood that working class kids in a multiracial environment needed to have a reason to come to school. They needed to have something to be involved in. They had to have something to care about. And it may not be how well they did in their math class, but maybe it would be, how they did on the volleyball court, or in Key Club, or, some other thing that they were involved in. And the leadership understood that. And one of the things that was fascinating to me when I interviewed Paul Sakamoto is that he said when they were interviewing people to hire at Sunnyvale, people would come, young people especially, but who were interested in working with working class kids in a Title I school. And so they were kind of motivated and had a sense of mission. But they didn't just pick people who were like the best, in their major when they went to college. They picked people who were good with teenagers. And I thought this was remarkable. It's not something you often hear. You think, oh, you get the best candidate. So you want somebody with the highest test scores or the best GPA, but that person may not be a very good teacher, and that person may not be able to relate to teenagers. And then you get people like Carolyn Buzzdiker and Doug Walker who understand what it is that young people are going through. And so the school acted as a magnet to those kinds of teachers, and they threw themselves into it. And I've had friends back east who say, yeah, but you don't want to create a formula for exploiting teachers so that they have to do extra work overtime. And we all know teachers do that at every level. They do it in high school, they do it in elementary school. That's kind of what teachers do. But what I'm not saying is necessarily a formula for exploitation. I think it was a formula for meaning. And one of the things I didn't expect when I started doing these interviews, and I interviewed principals, counselors, teachers, and lots of alumni, not as many people as I could have or wanted to, but there was a critical mass. And what I found was, to a teacher, they said, best job I ever had, Sunnyvale High School. Bob Douglas, who was a counselor and a science teacher at Sunnyvale High, wasn't able to be here tonight. He lives in North Carolina. He was in education for 43 years. He said, best job I ever had, because there was this critical mass. Sharon Prefontaine had said that as well. There was this critical mass of teachers who really cared. Did we have dud teachers? Of course. I teach at a university, or I did up until July 1st. I understand, and I'm sure some people thought that was me. But the point is, every school has them. But if you have a group of people who really care about teaching, about relating to kids, about making their lives better in some kind of way, they can make a difference. And there was enough of a critical mass that more people wanted to come. So I'll just say one more thing about what Sakamoto told me, which is that he understood that that teachers for this student population, us, would probably be able to relate better if they had similar backgrounds to us. So in fact, there are quite a few teachers at Sunnyvale High who graduated at a different era from Sunnyvale High. So they were first generation college students, went to college, got their BA, got their teaching credential, and then were drawn to passing it on. And those teachers ended up being extremely effective also.
It was kind of a characteristic of a lot of the teachers there. Even some of the teachers used to kind of not complain about it, but they used to understand that at Sunnyvale High, a lot of teachers were like teachers and counselors. That a lot of the students went to teachers to get counseling. And I'm talking about advice and things like that. One of our mutual friends, a Sunnyvale alum, great teacher, Jim Miller, is here, and we get together with him. And I remember many times going and talking to Jim after school about things, and it wasn't even about computer programming or anything that he was teaching. It was just that I had a rapport with him, and I was able to talk to him about it. And I know a lot of other people felt that way. I felt that way about Doug, Sharon, Carolyn. And so that counseling aspect is something that, when you're saying about people kind of wanting to do it versus being assigned to do it, that was, I think, a big difference at Sunnyvale High, was the teachers wanted to do that. They wanted to be that way. Also, though, Sunnyvale High, and it was unusual, especially at that time, was sort of the race factor, and things. And there were, I don't know, we've talked about this before, there were some racial incidents. I tend to have a kind of a different view of some of them, but still there was no doubting that the diversity of the school led itself to some conflicts. And for you, how much did that kind of not only make what was happening at Sunnyvale High sort of something universal in many areas, but also very unique? Because I remember, interestingly, that Blacks, Latinos, Asians, we all kind of consider ourselves minorities. We thought of ourselves as being like one group because we were all sort of in it together. And sometimes that splinters a little bit, but for the most part, I do feel that at Sunnyvale. And so I didn't always feel that any racial tension. Mm-hmm. For you, though, when you're examining and looking back on it, what were some of the things that you kind of came away with? And maybe how did they jive with what you were thinking about when you were experiencing them at the time?
Well, that's a really big question.
That's what I'm here for.
We have talked about this a lot. One of the things that we shared was a class status. Jackie said this to me. We were all alike. We were the same. There weren't distinctions of people who drove fancy cars to school or something like that. Some people had cars. A lot of people worked after school. And there was a kind of commonality of circumstance that we recognized as being more important than whatever differences that we had. So I think that was really important. We also had school leadership that said we have to get to know each other. We have to understand each other's culture and heritage. Paul Sakamoto instituted what he called an intergroup council, and he had student representatives from each ethnic group come together and meet on a monthly basis and say, we've got to learn each other's history. We've got to talk to each other. We're going to relate as human beings, not as categories, not as somebody different than that. And then part of what happened that came out of that, which I think was hugely impactful for me, is that the curriculum also changed. So there was an active Chicano student union. One of the teachers I idolized, Loretta Gutierrez, was my Spanish teacher. She began teaching a Mexican-American literature class. Sunnyvale hired Doug Walker to teach U.S. Black history. His course was absolutely transformative, not just in learning Black history, but understanding the importance of history and asking hard questions and investigating processes that were beyond our control and had been completely invisible to me. So these classes sparked my sense of needing to know the world in a different way, and also and it made me ask questions about my own heritage, which I didn't really know very much of. I mean, here I was, a Scandinavian transplant. My parents were immigrants from Western Canada. My father was Danish. My mother was Norwegian. There were no Norwegians around here that I knew, except for Vern Hulte. If Vern's here somewhere, yes. Yay, Vern. But at the time, it wasn't a meaningful category to me. So it prompted me to start asking questions in a really fruitful way. And it made me look at history and my own family's history of immigration. And I just came to a much deeper understanding of all of American history as well as myself. And so it opened up rather than closed down.
That's actually interesting because, it's sort of easy to ask Asians, Blacks, Latinos, like what it was like to be at a diverse multicultural school. Hardly anybody ever thought to ask the white people what they thought. In fact, Karen had a book about Scandinavian culture and things like that.
I wrote a book about that too.
Yes, which I enjoyed, but I also used to tease her about so wait a minute, you're going to be talking about racism toward whites? Wait a minute, is that even possible? But it's just a joke. But it was sort of you yourself too, were so involved, and your involvement at the school was with so many different groups, and then you kind of had this enlightenment as you were going through. Was it like an awkward thing for a lot of white students when some of the racial conflicts were going on, or did they relate to like what was happening, even though they themselves might not be in that group? Mm-hmm. They had that commonality. Did you feel as though they related to what was going on?
Well, based on my interviews, yes. I mean, there was a conflagration, I never know exactly what to call it, in the winter of 1970 when a group of science students interested in the environment organized a Smogfree Locomotion Day. And everybody was supposed to get to school without using a gas combustion engine. I'm sure I've mangled that word. Anyway, so there was a parade before school, including teachers, probably 1,000 people from the school of 2000 who were marching around the neighborhood, just like in red wagons, on kick scooters, on bicycles. It was just really a fun, loving kind of like, oh, we've got to change our habits. We're going to make the earth a better place to live. And then we got back to school 10 minutes late. And the new principal, who was not very competent, went ballistic and threatened everybody. And it turned into a major confrontation and was pretty ugly. And that was an interesting lesson, I think, for all of us. First of all, how things could, when your great principal left and you didn't have the same kind of sage leadership, what happened? And of course, that's inevitable. But also the way that event got portrayed in the press by the San Jose Mercury News, the Sunnyvale Standard, and people I interviewed said, "Wait a second, that's not what happened. This wasn't about race. This was about smog-free locomotion, and save the earth." And then, but then out of that got also a student activist, and again, I would say probably especially from the Chicano Student Union and the Black Student Union, because they were organized, which really helped in a moment like that, made some demands for changes at the school. So they wanted modular scheduling, they wanted better food in the cafeteria, they wanted, everybody wanted that. They wanted a multicultural curriculum, and some of those changes came to pass. And in particular, I mean, it was out of that the school decided, and the district approved hiring Doug Walker to teach US Black History. And that was a transformative class, not just because of the content, but because of the kind of teacher that Doug was. So it changed relationships. And I think students understood something different because they realized what happens if you organize and you work together. But there was a basis for solidarity, and people understood that. So there was a critique of the media, if you will, Robert, for turning it into a race riot as opposed to something else. Yeah.
I think it was a race riot. No, I know what you're saying. In fact, one other thing I remember that you just mentioned that I'd forgotten about was that the school did go through quite a change with the principal. And with it came a different atmosphere. And I always thought that when you have like a principal who took our notes, in fact, I remember like in my early years that to me, a lot of the front office people seemed to be these white guys with buzz cuts. You know what I mean? That's what I remembered. I remember thinking that was the attitude you kind of got from them. And I just remember thinking later how that their attitude amped up everything. You know what I mean? That I don't think that it should necessarily have gotten to the point, but when you're taking people who are protesting for change and treating them like they're causing trouble, you're going to automatically sort of change everything that's happening around it. And I remember thinking that it didn't have to be as bad, but I do think, though, that out of the bad kind of came good, which is a lot of the changes we actually did end up seeing. We did see modular scheduling. We did see open campus. I didn't even see open campus, my God, you know. But I do remember, this is for some of the people, because it was prior to me going to Sunnyvale High, but I remember following it in the news, which was that there was a guy, I believe his name, Alarcon, Ray Alarcon, I think his name was? Who fought the dress code. Prior to me coming to Sunnyvale, girls had to wear clothes a certain way, guys had to wear clothes a certain way. And I remember reading about this dress code fight that was going on. And then by the time I got to Sunnyvale, the dress code was gone. And so I do remember thinking in my mind, like, oh, Sunnyvale High is kind of a progressive kind of place. Because, you could complain about a lot of things, you wouldn't necessarily see change. And so we were able to see change like that.
Footnote, he actually took the case to federal court and won. And so they dismantled the dress code in this district because of Ramon's case.
Yes.
It was organized.
Yes. I could wear my dress up higher than my knee. When you were researching your book, you're going to hear all these different opinions and all these memories from people. And some of them are obviously individual, but then they're also changed through time, and people sometimes look back on memories and tell you what they're thinking about the way they view it now versus the way they viewed it then. For you, when you were sort of interviewing people and everything, how organic was it? Like, did you just let people sort of say, what they remembered or something, and then kind of dig a little deeper to find out maybe what the change might be? Because I would think that change would be in and of itself significant to see how somebody changed from the way they looked at things when they were in high school to the way they look now. For you, though, trying to talk to so many people and then incorporate it, synthesize it into a book, what was the sort of the process for you when you were talking to people?
Well, before COVID, I was able to interview people in person. So that is an important thing that COVID changed, because then I actually did a lot more interviews over Zoom. And that's a different kind of thing as well. So this is a challenge of oral history. I'm a firm believer in oral accounts and archiving them. In fact, the interviews that I've done are going to be archived at the California History Center at De Anza. I really firmly believe this. But our memories do shift and change, and I try to start interviews by asking people about their home in 1968. Like, what was the configuration of the home? Who was living there? What school were you going to? What was happening? So try to ground people in the everyday. And I think that helped move back. But there's always some, I don't want to say distortion, but there's some ways that our minds twist things to make it work better for us, and that's one of the frustrating things about talking to Robert, because he ran a video of every party that we went to, every interaction. No, some people have really astute, acute memories. But I also think that how people remember is important. That's a kind of information in and of itself. And part of what I tried to do in the book was to put together a pastiche of how people remembered something. And I would say, well, this person said this, and this person said that, and it's probably some combination of these 5 things. And I think that dialogue, that difference of perspective is useful. I also, even though I do oral histories and have done for years as part of my professional work, I also think historical documents are invaluable. So yearbooks. The Skywriter, the newspaper at Sunnyvale High, was astonishingly useful. I am so impressed looking back at how concrete and well reported and well written those newspapers were, and they ended up being extremely important. And the man that I co-wrote the book with, Nick Monroe, he actually went through and read all the Skywriters and helped organize them and code them for me. It was extremely helpful because things I would forget, things everybody forgot, there it was in print, this happened last week. Now, there were certain things that didn't get recorded, like fights. I was really interested in fights. I have a chapter on fighting, and I just think it's an important kind of conflict, and it happens in every high school, and Sunnyvale had the reputation of being like a bad school, a school where fights happen and people threaten you. And that was not anybody's experience that I interviewed. They could be involved in fights, but weren't intimidated by them, essentially. And then I had faculty who went to other high schools and said, oh yeah, Monte Vista was worse, or whatever. Their opinion, there aren't archives that speak to the number of physical confrontations that happened, in a particular week. So there wasn't that kind of data. But that was one of those things where perception is actually really important. So if you remember being scared, to go into the girls' bathroom, for example, or if, whatever, or you weren't, then that was an important kind of information.
So if the press writes about fights, you're not happy, but if they don't write about fights, you're not happy. Okay, got it. One of the things that, and we talked about, and it does kind of tend to dominate because obviously the diversity at the school, and you talked about the progressiveness that came about through Black studies and some of the things like that, and we can talk a little bit more because Sunnyvale High was on the forefront of ethnic studies. When I went from Sunnyvale High to De Anza College and San Francisco State were like 2 of the schools that were incorporating ethnic studies into their curriculum. And weird now because it's sort of the norm, but at that time it was like a very surprising thing to hear. And I remember even among like Blacks for Black studies, Asians for Asian American studies, there was somewhat of a reluctance, to get involved in that because we were just not used to kind of seeing that as important. And then as we took those classes, we got an awareness of like how much of our community's history was not written down, was not recorded, and really did make a big difference. But one of the things that I always wonder about sometimes when I think back about Sunnyvale High was that as progressive as it seemed to be for minorities, and there was definitely progress made, I always wonder, can the same thing be said about the gender kind of discrimination? You know what I mean? Because to me, I never really felt as though the female students got to see the same kind of progression in a number of different things. The most obvious one to me was even when I was a senior, the girls' sports teams were still wearing their PE uniforms, which I thought was like insane, you know? And because like I played football and we had a new uniform every year, you know what I mean? And stuff. What was that situation? I know that you explored it in your book and in your interviews. What was the kind of the situation? What did Sunnyvale High's situation with that? How did that represent what was going on then? And what kind of insights did you kind of gain from talking to people about that?
Chapter 3 is about athletics before Title IX, which didn't pass until 1972, and as Carolyn Busdiker reminds me, wasn't really implemented in the state of California until late in the 70s. But Sunnyvale High School had an amazing athletic program for girls. They didn't have uniforms till after we left, but we had an incredibly strong advocate in Carolyn Busdiker, who was the head of girls' PE, and the staff was also incredible. One of the things Buzz said in one of the many times I interviewed her for the book was, you know, we believed girls could learn. And the boy PE teachers didn't think that, you know, students should arrive on campus being able to dribble a basketball and throw a baseball or something like that. And Buzz's perspective was, well, girls don't know how to do that because they've never been exposed. Just teach them, you know, give them a chance, give them a racket and a birdie, and they can play badminton after practicing for a while. But what you have to do is you have to give them court space, you have to give them instruction, you have to give them a chance. So from the late 1950s, she built this incredible staff in the girls' PE department who believed in making room. Yes, let's just take a moment to thank Carol. And it meant that she had to fight all the time for court space to share basketball courts. We had a one gym, not two gyms, and there was a dividing line in the middle. And when it finally came about that the boys' basketball was supposed to share the gym with girls' basketball, you know, the coaches would say, "Oh no, you know, our boys have to. We get to have the gym first because our boys have to go home and do homework." Oh, right, girls don't have to do homework. And so every step of the way, it required advocacy. And again, part of what was so remarkable is that she did that with great humor and unbelievable persistence to make it possible for us to learn sports, we might have inferior basketballs, and you know, for the first years, you know, girls had to play outside in the gravel courts with those chain link basketball nets, and you know, but eventually they got indoors and eventually they got uniforms. But it was a long struggle, and then it finally took national legislation to change that, and then the state of California implementing that legislation.
Ms. Buzzdocker doesn't remember, but she used to scare me when I used to go into the gym. I don't know what I was doing wrong, but she used to get mad at me when I was playing badminton or something, and I was always afraid to say anything. I said, okay. So you didn't need a male coach to scare you. You know, and it's easy to kind of underestimate, really, the significance of why that's important. For you on a personal level, and I don't know how much of this is in the book, but, you know, I remember you talking about it and seeing, like, a real personality growth in you when you were playing women's volleyball. And I remember, and it's not an insignificant thing. I think boys can kind of relate to that a little bit more because boys grow up a lot playing sports. And what happens playing sports can really affect you, your confidence, the way you view things, the way you view yourself, the way you view working with a team concept. Boys have a lot more experience at doing that. But for you, I remember the change that you went through at that time when I was turning around and talking to you about it. And then later on, we were talking about it, and it came up when we were talking about your book. Talk a little bit about that personal growth that happened from that and why that's significant in terms of the topic we're talking about generally.
I feel really strongly about the importance of recess and sports, at every level, including high school. I think I started getting interested in playing baseball and playing different things in junior high. And at our junior high in Sunnyvale, they had after school sports. So they paid teachers, probably not very much, to stay after. And they had a late bus. So if you stayed late to play soccer or basketball or something like that, then you could still get home. And so your parents weren't worried about you. You didn't have transportation issues. And I hear that that's an issue in the city of Sunnyvale today about late buses for people playing sports. But for me, it really gave me a new sense of my body and confidence to move on the court, especially. I loved baseball, but I wasn't as good at it. But when being tall was really an advantage in playing volleyball. But then learning how to work as a team, I think that was another really powerful part of it. And I would just like to say, I'm wearing these earrings today. They belong to my sister-in-law. They're big earrings, but part of what I remember getting ready for a volleyball game was wearing big hoop earrings because the Chicana girls at Sunnyvale did that and they just looked badass. And I was like, okay. And then Buzz would say, take them off, Hansen. You're going to get your earring caught in the net and it's going to rip your hair. I was like, oh no, that won't happen to me. It's fine. But it was like having a uniform because I was still wearing my little green penny thing, whatever it was, whatever you called those nasty gym outfits. And what's true is that the research that has been done on girls who play athletics shows that they do better in the world. They're less likely to get pregnant as teenagers. They, go on to learn. They have confidence in themselves. They can say no to things they don't want to do. And there's just this all-around sense of well-being that comes from that. But again, I just want to circle back to the teamwork, being on a team, learning how to dig, set, pass, spike, and having a mentor who showed us how to do that, a relationship outside of the classroom. I also think those coaching relationships are invaluable. And so that cultivated special relationships for me.
You were talking about the Chicano girls coming out with the hoops earrings. I don't know if you got into this in the book. We talked about it, but it's really sort of like a running joke with people who went to Sunnyvale High about how dangerous the girls' bathrooms were. Remember? It was like a running joke the entire time, yeah. And maybe not a joke, but still. But that kind of did. Yes, and I remember students from other schools knew about it, and they used to say, "You don't want to do that." When they came to Sunnyvale High to play a game or something, you don't want to go. And it's amazing to me because you'd be thinking like, they're afraid to go into the alley or they're afraid to go behind the building, but they were afraid to go to the girls' bathroom. That was like really interesting. But to me later, when I thought about it and why it was such a running joke, was it did kind of represent sort of an image that Sunnyvale High had at the time, but because we laughed about it, really, you know what I mean? It's interesting to me that when I think about like the way people might have viewed Sunnyvale High or the way people might have viewed, the community and things like that, never really fazed people that went to Sunnyvale High. I really don't think that it did and stuff. When you were doing your book, did that kind of come across to you that and make it easier for you in terms of writing the book? Because people are sort of open about the way they felt and the way they looked at things at that time. And that one was just one of the representative examples I remember of people, of what they thought other people thought of Sunnyvale High.
Yes. So yes, about the girls' bathrooms. Just
I knew you would. I knew you would. A good author.
There was people smoked in the bathrooms. Anyway, you just avoid them whenever possible. But it wasn't because of being dangerous. But there was an image of the school, and people made disparaging comments when they come to play sports against us, or when we went somewhere else to play a game. And there was a way that it made us feel indignant. It made the teachers feel indignant. And there was a way, I think it created a kind of solidarity, because it was like, okay, you're afraid of us, but you don't need to be afraid of us, but that's okay, because we're fine. And you have this trumped up stereotype of what you think it's like at our school, because our school was very safe. And to a person, I asked them these questions, and people said, I felt fine. I was there, again, fights, yes, but those tended to be really episodic and individual, not a kind of a sense of a dangerous place.
Yeah.
So the school pride came from that as well.
I really do. I really felt as though people, and it was like sort of an interesting kind of pride in hearing people talk about Sunnyvale that way. It's a hard thing to pin down, but I do remember that it was a sense of pride and not embarrassed or anything at all. Mm-hmm. And maybe even sort of a laughing about it and that kind of thing. Because we've all seen Mean Girls, so there's bad stuff at every school. So, tell me something. When you're doing the research, though, you kind of came to a number of different points where this was going to make it into the book, and that was going to make it into the book, and everything like that. But for you, in doing the interviews and the insights and the things that you were hearing, and maybe the revelations you were going through as you heard people's stories, what were some of the most significant for you? What maybe even the most surprising? But what were some of the revelations and things that people told you that surprised you, even though you went to the school? You might have even known them. You might have known their friends. You came from the same community. But what were some of the things that maybe surprised you and maybe resonated with you more like as a surprise than you were expecting?
Well, I was surprised that so many people felt like I did about how important the school community was for me. I mean, I really do feel that it was my family away from home, and it was a very important place to be and to be appreciated, to find friends. And I heard that over and over again. And it doesn't mean that we had no mean girls, because of course we did, just like we had mean boys, but they were the exception. And I guess as an extension of that, and I want to say thanks to all the people who agreed to share their stories with me, there is a kind of generosity amongst Sunnyvale students that is still overwhelming to me today in a very positive way. There's like a belief that when you do well, we do well. And that was true then, and that is still true today. And I think that's really quite remarkable. I think that the teachers felt that as well. We didn't know each other's backstories very much, so I would say some of the surprises for me was learning more about what people were struggling with and what was happening at home that I had absolutely no idea of. We would have slumber parties occasionally, so there are some houses we go toilet paper people's houses and do all those silly things that teenagers do. We had a lot of fun doing it. But I think that a lot of people felt as I did. This was a safe place to come and be cared for and nurtured. And I don't need to tell you what's going on at home for you to go ahead and embrace me, because we're all here. And again, there was that sense of we that came out of the rest of the town, the rest of the district looks down on us. But guess what? We're really good people, and we take care of each other, and so that ends up being more important than other things.
Yeah, and I think that that's so important that you wrote this book with that kind of thing in mind, because I think that it is sort of like, for all the generalities and all the stereotypes and all the other things that people might have had from the past, your book is going to endure. You know what I mean? And that image of Sunnyvale High and the things that you're trying to get across will endure. And that really is in itself the most significant thing about this. Now that you...
Could I just say one more thing about that? So, you know, I think saying what a school is a very challenging idea. A school is so much more than you go to the classroom and you learn something and then you take a test at the end and then you get your degree. And community doesn't really capture it sufficiently in my mind. So I was looking for words and I really haven't come up with a descriptor. But community, I think, comes closest to it because there are all these levels and people weaving in and out and friendship groups over here and activities over there. And there's a way in which you come together and support each other. And Sunnyvale High School really did that. Mm-hmm. And I think that's one of the reasons it has endured. You know, the community has endured. Yeah.
When you were researching your book over years, was there any one point when you thought you had the story down and then you did some more interviews and then you decided, oh, it still needs to evolve? Because we've talked about that, the evolution of the way the story came about. Yeah. Now that you have it in book form, and it's for sale on Amazon, as well as other places.
Published December 1st.
Right. Now that it's actually its own thing, you know, it's the book and all the research is done, all the decisions to be made about what to include, what to talk about, what not to talk about, and everything like that. What's your thought about the book as a whole now, stepping back a little bit from the process? Mm-hmm. And what would you maybe want people to think about when they're going to read it?
Mm-hmm. Well, I actually would love to have done more interviews. The interviews cluster from like 1962 to class of 1976. So it reflects more of the time when I'm there than the time before, the time after. And the school could use a full hearing, I think. And as I did more interviews and I got referrals from somebody, to a friend or a teacher they were especially fond of, I followed those and people, again, mostly said yes, which was wonderful. And I learned a lot about that, but I wish I could have kept going. So, for example, one of the things I learned from Sakamoto was, what an outstanding art department that Sunnyvale had. They had 2 full-time art teachers and a whole wing of the campus. And kids would go there and hang out after school in the evenings, in between classes. They loved what they were able to do there. And I think that's a special kind of resource. I think people felt that way about music also. It was a really multifaceted music program. There were different choral groups. There was a marching band that was, just incredible, award-winning. And some of you here were in the band and you can tell me even more. The Rose Bowl parade, performing at 49er halftime, winning acknowledgments up and down the state and across the country. Outstanding leadership and commitment on the part of parents as well as teachers and students. And I interviewed some people about the band, but you could write a whole book about the band. So there are these corners and theater. There quite a few people were involved in theater and have gone on to do theater their entire lives. But I would say that's an underdeveloped part of the book. Yeah.
Interesting. We're going to break for some Q&A from people, so think about what you've heard. Oh, wait a minute, not yet. I'm still talking. No, we're going to break it for Q&A, but just some final thoughts as you sit here before a group of people who not only are waiting to read the book, but also helped you in putting it together, any final thoughts or something that you want to convey about everybody here that helped you in that process, directly or indirectly? And we'll get the tissue ready in case you...
I do have my Kleenex at my side. Well, you know, I opened with that quote from Leif Inger about miracles needing a witness. And it's partly how I feel about oral history, too, that it's really important for people's stories to be told, and there are so many in this room, in the school, and I just feel incredibly fortunate because I really feel like the seeds of my personality, my being, my quest, for understanding the world really started at Sunnyvale High School. And I feel that my friends and my teachers helped give me the strength to believe in myself and to carry that forward. So I am incredibly grateful. And this feels like such a full circle, and I don't know what else to say without crying. So thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Karen Hansen, author, fellow student. Let me see. We're going to do some Q&A. You're going to do it?
Maybe you want to call. Oh, you want to call them?
I think if they raise their hand, I think they can do it.
Karen, in the time period you looked at, did you, high schools have cultures, and did you find a consistency of culture from the period that you looked at to the period that ended? Or did you find that there was changes in that culture as you looked at how the culture of the high school went over that period of time?
Well, that's a really interesting question, and since I didn't study the end as carefully and interview students really after 1977, I can't speak to it in the same way. But I do see that the issue of attachment to the school and belief in Sunnyvale School's spirit evident in the mid-60s and evident in 1981 before it closed. And so that's quite remarkable because the school underwent lots of changes, demographic changes. I assume you've seen the slide passing by. It was actually you, Jim, who told me, the number of languages that were spoken at the school when you were teaching there in 1970. Tagalog, Spanish, Mandarin, Cantonese, Portuguese, Russian. I mean, so many languages, but by the end of the 70s, it was also Vietnamese and Cambodian and the refugees who were coming, and so there were even more languages, and yet there was a sense of, we're in it together, and some of the staff was still the same, and there are some people like Sharon Prefontaine who was there till the bitter end. Buzz Steicher was as well, and that makes a difference in recreating that culture. But one of the quotes that I want to read was from Terry Dykman, and I think this speaks to it. Terry Dykman was a counselor who worked in the late 60s through the mid-70s at Sunnyvale High, and he was beloved. I'm sorry to say he died last year. So he is not able to be here now. But it gives you a sense of the feeling, I think, and the people I've talked to who went to the bitter end would agree. So he said, there were probably a dozen real difference makers at Sunnyvale that created an environment and a culture that was really unique. There was something almost magical in being part of that staff. We knew that we were on a mission of some sort. You've got each other's back and you're willing to experiment and do some things. And he likened their work to a joint venture. He said, if it's an art project, we had great clay. The kids were all in. Yeah. Here's to Terry.
Hi, Professor Hansen back here.
Oh.
Hi, I'm Deanna Gonzalez, class of 1980, so right before the closure. I'm somewhat disappointed that, not against you or anything, but disappointed you weren't able to interview anyone past 1976, because I believe the makeup of the, as you mentioned, there was demographic changes. There were, migration to Northern California, especially in San Jose, Santa Clara County. That changed the makeup of our classes, and the number of percentages of folks that you have listed there as of 1970 certainly changed by the time that I was in that class. I have three older brothers. I had three older brothers. I'm happy to say that one of them some of you may know, Ron Gonzalez, former mayor, and very proud of him and all my family. All of us, except for one, the very last child or sibling, was not able to graduate from Sunnyvale. I wonder if any of the people that you interviewed felt different about how the experience. Did they have a sibling like myself? I mean, if you had interviewed me, I would have said, interview my sister, because to this day, when you bring it up, she does not own Fremont High School as hers. Mm-hmm. Neither her boyfriend or husband to this day. They don't, they're like, no, we didn't go. That was we had to graduate from Fremont, is how they put it. Mm-hmm. But getting back to how people felt about Sunnyvale, and the time that during that time of change, I think that the things that you mentioned about fighting, or the things that people were writing in the newspapers, were definitely because of the demographics. But it's also about and I don't want to bring a negative point, but I also think that it may have been because of the makeup of the school, that the perceptions of the folks not at that school were because of the people going to the school. Mm-hmm. And so I feel sad about that when I think of how we felt in my class, many of my classmates felt. It's like, well, we get this bad rap, but we're not bad people. Yeah. And it's because of who we are. Yeah. And the color of our skins. And I was on the softball team, and I remember going cross town, and it was like, oh, here they come. And we would win those games because, here we come. We're Jets. Uh-huh. So I just want to thank you for the book, but it would be great to know if you have like a book number 2. Because I would love to be interviewed, because I have a story and I don't want to take up more time.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Your story resonates very much from what I've heard from virtually everyone. And I can tell you two things. One is Adrian Stanga first came to Sunnyvale High and I think it was 1957 or 58. And he was brought into the school because there were a large number of Latino boys who were getting suspended. And the district was trying to figure out what's going on. What are these Latino boys doing, and how can we get a handle on it, or what's going wrong? And so that was in the 50s, and it was a working class school. It was, people's parents worked at HP on the assembly line. They worked at the canneries, at Libby's and Calcan, and so it was a working class population, and it was racially mixed from the beginning. And that was part of the stigma, and it was also part of the pride that you're describing. I don't have volume 2 planned. I am writing a memoir also that is about my time at Sunnyvale High, because this book is really about all of us, and it's about the interviews, but I want to invite you to go ahead and start doing oral histories with people, because there's a lot more to be done, and I think it would be a really valuable community project, whether you want to write it into a book or not. I think documenting that part of the history of the Valley is really, really important.
Professor Hansen, thank you very much for coming to Sunnyvale. My name is Richard Mellinger. I am the city council member representing the district where Sunnyvale High School used to be. And one of the things that I have seen both before and during my time in public office is the ripple effects that its closure has had on our community, and it has frankly left a wound in our community. And I wanted to ask if during your research and in your book you've gotten into the closure of Sunnyvale High School, why it was closed, and the effects of that closure on the community. Thank you.
That's a really important question, and it's not one I investigated deeply. What I have are accounts from teachers and students talking about what they saw as a very unfair process. But what I can tell you is that I don't know if Andy is in the room. There's Andy. Andy just wrote a book about Fremont High School, 100 years. It's a wonderful book. I encourage everybody to buy it. Andy, you use newspapers from San Jose, Palo Alto, Sunnyvale to look at the process of what happened when Sunnyvale closed. I only met Andy on email about 3 months ago, and we discovered that we had these complementary projects. But I wish I had known you've been so generous about sharing your files and everything, but my book was already in press. But would you like to say anything about that?
I spoke for an hour about 2 weeks ago. I can talk to the gentleman later.
Okay. It was seen as incredibly unjust, and the district debated. When there was a decline in state funding because of Prop 13, and when there was a decline in the baby boom, so the demographic of school-age children was shrinking, a school had to change in the district. This was the logic. The two candidate schools were Homestead or Sunnyvale. And Homestead, where Steve Jobs graduated, or Sunnyvale High School that sent very few people to college straight away and had lower test scores and all those kinds of things that people measure schools by, which is not to say that they're irrelevant, but just to say they're only a small part of the story. Because Sunnyvale was really good at what it did, which is developing citizens for life, for their lives and for the community. But Andy kind of goes into it in great depth. So I appreciate what you did.
We had Robert Handa.
100 years of Fremont High School, huh? I'll bet it's a good book, but don't plan on retiring on the residuals from here.
Professor, Dennis Marr, class of 64. Right.
Yeah.
Did you write this as an academic book, or did you get any pushback from your dean saying you're spending 11 years writing about your high school? And I also just want to mention about when we were there in 1964, we had 400 in our class, and there were only 4 of us who were Asian. And so I always tell people, we had so few Asians, we didn't have enough for a minority group.
That's very funny.
But like I said, though, the Asians considered themselves, along with the blacks and Latinos, as minorities. And that was probably one of the reasons why.
Mm-hmm. So the question is an important one. You obviously understand academic structures that diminish certain kinds of projects. My last book was similarly so inspired. I always heard from my grandmother that she had migrated from Norway and grew up on an Indian reservation in North Dakota. And my cousins and I would always go, how did that happen? That's so bizarre. So after I got tenure, which is a key point, they can't fire you, I started looking into that and found out actually there were all these Norwegian women who owned land on this Indian reservation, and there were lots of Dakota women who also owned land. And so I spent 15 years on that project to doing oral history, studying land ownership records and everything. And And in the beginning, I think my chair and my deans were like, but they would still give me a small grant so I could fly to North Dakota and do some more research. And then by the time I finished, and I feel similarly about the Sunnyvale book, but by the time I finished that book, I said to myself, this case study of this one Indian reservation in the Scandinavian community is actually the story of American history. This is one very particular place, but it's kind of what's happening all around. And so I took on this project because I was so profoundly affected by my experience in high school. And I set out to find out if other people felt the same. And so people were skeptical. And it was a new area of inquiry for me, except for the fact that I do oral histories and I love doing oral histories and I know the value of them. And so I didn't expect it to be a big project, but it kept growing. And even though I stopped when I did, it did take 11 years. And I would say that it wasn't intended to be a strictly academic book, but I would say it is a sociological analysis that uses people's stories to try to understand what was going on and what made this school special. But it's only about this school. It's not comparative. There are no other schools. So it's a case study, and people have to take it on its own terms. But now Andy's got a book about Fremont. There's another book out about Cupertino. And that says to me, what is it that's happening right now that all these people are, certainly at least the three of us are writing books about high schools in this district? Something happened here that was really special and different. There was experimentation, there was investment in public education, there was a multicultural community, and we're trying to learn from it. And so I think you take these books and you put them in conversation with each other, and maybe that can help educators out there today. That is certainly my hope. Here's an example of what these amazing educators did. They experimented, and sometimes things went terribly, but they didn't get fired, and they were able to make mistakes and then move on. And maybe there's an idea there that's a spark that can inspire people to try something and kind of go back to that sense of what do we share in common as opposed to how different we are.
Talking about Andy's book, it reminded me that when we were at a reunion game one time and King's Academy was saying, well, we're trying to line up a game against Fremont. And so we're hoping that the Sunnyvale High people will come out for that. And I remember talking to them and saying, hey, look, Sunnyvale High's closed. A lot of the kids who would be going to Sunnyvale High are going to Fremont High School. So if you're going to root for a team, you don't necessarily root against Fremont because you're rooting against the kids that would have been going to Sunnyvale. So I just thought that was a very interesting thing to remember about Fremont High School, is that they took on a lot of the community. Again, as pointed out, they had to really jerry-rig the district, and it made it very inconvenient for a lot of people, and a lot of people did not want to graduate from there. But in terms of the makeup of the school, Fremont was a lot more like Sunnyvale than any of the other schools were at that time.
I'm a little nervous, but I just wanted to say my name's Vince Baza. I graduated in '79, and eventually I started coaching over at Fremont High School, and to Robert's point. And when I was coaching, I coached over 20 years over there. And while I was coaching, there must have been like 4 or 5 parents that remembered my brother who died in Vietnam. And they were all from Sunnyvale, and they were all the parents of these kids. And so it was really kind of special, knowing this is a big family, and it goes a long way. And it always touched my heart. Doug Boyd was my AD. He was the one that brought me over there. I saw Carolyn there, and just a whole bunch of old teachers that went over there, and I felt right at home, so just wanted to say that. Yeah.
The Baza family, one of the great families of Sunnyvale High.
Hello, everyone. I'm going to stand up. I'm Jackie Gooch. I graduated with the class of 1974. We were known as the Great Eight. There was 8 siblings that went through Sunnyvale High School. All 8 left with a diploma in their hand. All 8. Out of 8 of us, there's just 3 of us that's still living, but there's 5 jets flying high looking down on us.
Yeah.
And there's 3 down here still floating on. And I just want to say, I know a lot of you know me. This is who I am now. I have never been so proud of where I come from, the school I come from. We've got doctors, we've got nurses, we've got realtors, we've got authors, we've got news commentators, we've got educators. We might have been a little bit slow, but you know what? At the end of the day, we number one, we Jets.
Hi, Susie Brink, class of 1972. I'm going to answer your question. You said you're trying to find a word that describes family. This is my family from high school, and it's been 52 years since I graduated. I have girls that I play cards with once a month that I graduated with. I have cheerleader friends that I still see from 52 years ago. There's a reason for that. We were a strong community. We had Jet pride. You said pride, pride and family, I think are what we signify at Sunnyvale High School.
I say thank you to everyone, and especially to Robert and Karen. This has been a fascinating evening, and I'm not going to start any local wars, but you sure outnumbered Fremont High School. We don't own any more chairs than what we have here. We even got the bar stools out of the kitchen. Wonderful, wonderful showing too. A couple of things. The gift shop downstairs is open, so if anybody will look through any Sunnyvale memorabilia there, please do. There's also extra yearbooks from various years that we keep a full set in our library, but we have some extras of some years, and they're selling them for $5 a piece down there.
Oh, goodness.
So please do help yourself. And we just happen to have 2 extra ones for your year. So in case you have more than one child or more than one person in your life that you know wants to inherit your book, it comes complete with flags marking your photographs on here.
Can you do that with Karen's book for my name?
So you have your extra annual.
Yes, thank you. Oh my goodness.
And then Karen also has her books for sale here. So she will be going to sell them and available for signatures and autographing any.
Could I put a footnote to that?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, I just wanted to let people know that we were only able to get a certain number of books here in time because it actually hasn't been officially published. So if you're in line and you want a book and we run out, we have flyers so that you can pre-order at a discount, not quite at the author's discount, but still at the discount. And if you want me to sign it, which I would love to do, you can just send me an email and I'll send you a book plate with a signature and inscription to you. So I have a way of doing that. And so I just want to put that out there for the future.
Oh, me and Karen.
Thank you all for coming.